Hi, welcome to SBR Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. We are continuing our mid-July coverage of college football right now with Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. We're going to take a look at the SEC West. Joe Duffy, how's baseball season going, and are you looking forward to football season?
It's been another great baseball season. We go into the All-Star break red hot. A typical baseball season, and we're going to have an even better baseball season in part. I got a great treasure trove of some new systems, but our old-fashioned techniques have worked for decades and decades, so it's not like we're going to deviate from them. We just got a little bit more in our arsenal this year.
The SEC West, I guess we have to start with Alabama, right? #1 recruiting class year after year, and not always one of these highly touted teams that is a bad bet. Sometimes they come out and cover those huge spreads game in and game out. This year, though, on paper, they are still a favorite to win the SEC West, but not the odds-on favorite. They're plus 215 right now to win the SEC West, and their win total is 9.5 minus 140, and at least on paper, there are some question marks, are some holes to fill. We know that they will be able to fill those holes with the elite of college football, but you know, is there a possibility that Alabama could wind up being overvalued this year? What do you think, Joe?
I think this will be a year that Alabama will probably not win the SEC West. They are vulnerable in that sense, but from a betting standpoint, I also think when they're a big favorite, look, because Nick Saban does want to find some talent at quarterback and wide receiver, and nobody recruits more depth than he does, that I really think that in some cases, he's going to be playing the third and fourth quarters as if the games are close. He wants to see how some of his third stringers do in real game situations. So I do think that Alabama will be pretty good as a big favorite. But conversely, in competitive games, I think they could be very vulnerable to upsets. This is a year where they don't have any proven talent right now at quarterback and wide receiver. But Alabama is really the only team in the country that doesn't have to have the best skilled position players because they dominate everywhere else. I mean, every year they're among the top teams in the country when it comes to recruiting. But I do think Alabama will be very good as a big favorite. But in competitive games, I think that's where it's going to be a good situation to bet against them.
All right, interesting analysis, Joe Duffy. Well, most of the teams in the SEC West have a lot of buzz heading into the season, but maybe the team with the most buzz besides Alabama is Auburn, right? They've got this quarterback, Jeremy Johnson, who some are saying is going to be as great as Cam Newton. There's a lot of hype around him. You know, the defense has been a liability, but there are signs that it might be improved, possibly significantly improved. They're plus 350 to win the West, and their season win total is 8.5. The over is minus 155. I'm thinking that, you know, that the defense might be more improved than people are expecting, and that betting value from Auburn will come, but it won't necessarily come from Johnson in the offense. It'll come from a much improved defense. You expect Auburn to be a team that will have line value in the upcoming year.
Well, there is a reason that as soon as Will Muschamp was let go, that Auburn had the phone ringing off of the hook. He's one of the top defensive minds in the country. He's there as a defensive coordinator. We talked about it on the SEC East video. I wouldn't want him as a head coach, but heck, sure, I want him as a defensive coordinator. And I also think that Muschamp's probably going to be able to get some campaigning to get for Auburn to slow down their offense a little bit. Muschamp, I think, is smart enough to know the best defense is one that's not always on the field. Keep in mind, Auburn, they have two very talented running backs. They're not completely proven, but if they can develop that running game, it should be very good. As you said, Jeremy Johnson, he should do very well for Nick Marshall. And, you know, Nick Marshall was kind of something that wasn't completely seamless when they went from Cam Newton, as you said, to Marshall, but they were still very competitive, obviously. And I think it's going to be a similar situation here where, again, Auburn's going to have a very talented quarterback. They should have a pretty deep 1-2 punch at the running game. And because they will be very improved on defense, I think there are going to be a lot of high totals early in the year. We're going to be sweating out some unders, but I do think that Auburn will start the year as a pretty good under team.
All right, and then another team that might have unders written all over them as well as possible betting value is Arkansas. Right now, they're plus 550 to win the West, and their win total is 8.5. The over is plus 130, but they have, you know, Brandon Allen, a returning quarterback with talent. They have a great running game, maybe the best running game in the SEC, possibly a strong offensive line. And, you know, we got to figure they're going to be running a lot, relatively low-scoring games and probably pretty competitive games with Arkansas, right?
Arkansas was one of our top dichotomous spread and straight-up teams where for a couple of years, well, year and a half, they were covering, but they weren't winning games. They were extremely competitive in their losses, and they finally were able to burst through and pick up some big wins against ranked teams at the end of the year, where they closed it winning 5 of 6. They're a legitimate contender indeed. As you said, with Jonathan Williams and Alex Collins, they have a great running game. Their offensive line returns 4 starters. They don't really have a clear breakout wide receiver, but they have some decent possession receivers. Look, their defense is a little bit of a work in progress, but they've had some talent there. So I think that their defense will get better as the year goes on. I think this will kind of be a team somewhat similar to what Bielema had in his Big Ten days at Wisconsin, where they're going to be smash mouth, ball control, and they're going to beat you with a lot of sustained drives. And look, it's built in clear Wisconsin style with a deep running game and some big uglies on the offensive line.
Now let's jump down to a team that I think might be a good fade, right? That's Mississippi State. Right now they are a plus 2,100 to win the West. Their season win total, though, is 7. The over is minus 105. And, you know, Mississippi State, they've got a big name at quarterback and not much else around him. And that, to me, is the formula for betting value against. And, you know, even though people are no doubt going to be expecting Mississippi State to have a down year, it's not exactly going to creep up on anyone. I think the discrepancy might be a little bit bigger than people are giving credit for, and that Mississippi State might get blown out by some of these tough SEC teams. What do you think?
It's going to be all on Dak Prescott. He's fairly much a one-man team. They lost their stud running back from last year, Josh Robinson, who was a nice bulldozer guy, very complimentary player. They're minus 7 starters on offense, 8 on defense. Look, the way that football is, we've seen that a good quarterback can win games single-handedly, so I think that Dak Prescott will have them pulling off some big upsets, but all in all, really the key to stopping Mississippi State is just to stop Prescott, and teams that are able to do that are going to beat them and beat them pretty soundly. But as you said, look, it's not like the odds maker is going to be overly biased by last year's performance. I do think that Mississippi State's going to be an underdog in most games this year, but I also think a lot of teams are going to use this as a chance to get some revenge on Mississippi State, which, as you'll remember, was actually the #1 team for part of last year. Yeah, this is going to be a very, very rough year for Mississippi State.
But you don't necessarily expect them to be a good bet against, at least to start the year?
No, I do think they will. My biggest worry is Prescott is capable of single-handedly winning games, and I do think that especially teams that are in good revenge situations might wind up blowing out Mississippi State. I do think that they'll be a bad spread team this year.
All right, and then Texas A&M, very interesting team. Right now they're plus 1,400 to win the West. Their season win total is 8, minus 105. Quarterback Kyle Allen is a rising star. Their offense is looking like it's going to be awesome again this year. They've got a great bunch of receivers that are for sure going to be able to put up points. And then on defense, big liability. They did hire this guy away from LSU. Do they have the personnel will he have the personnel to be able to make a big improvement? I'm not exactly sure, but obviously that's a big step forward. And then they also have a new offensive line coach who is going to be possibly a big help. He'll address a weakness from last year as well. I'm expecting maybe an improvement from Texas A&M, maybe a betting line value with them if their defense can make a reasonable jump forward, which I don't think is out of the question. What do you think, Joe?
That was one thing that Alabama started, where the SEC teams are now spending big money on offensive and defensive coordinators. Obviously, Texas A&M, where they really have to improve, is on the defensive side of the ball. John Chavis is one of the top defensive minds. Also, Kevin Sumlin, and this is most important, Sumlin has hinted that he is going to go more towards a running game. He's really stressed both running the ball and defense, and those two things go hand in hand in the offseason. So I do expect a much more emphasis on the defensive side of the ball. The thing that is going to be interesting, look, we know Sumlin loves to pass the ball, and he's got Kyle Allen, a stud quarterback who, after Thrill Hill got off to that good start and then all of a sudden hit a wall, Allen took over and showed that he's possibly has the ability to live up to all that hype. So that is a perfect example of why I don't like to make big preseason bets, because I want to keep a close eye on whether Sumlin really sticks to his plan of going more towards a ground game, or he says that this kid Allen is a stud, and I'm going to go to the Johnny Manziel days of really opening it up. And that's one of the closest things for bettors and sharps to watch, what type of pace, what type of offensive play calling Texas A&M is going to have, because, you know, if they play that wide open style, whether you got, Chavis or whether you got Peter Loshak as your defensive coordinator, when your defense is constantly being put on the field, it's tough to stop teams.
And then the other two teams we didn't mention, LSU, Mississippi, both a bunch of big question marks for both of them, but also some obviously big positives. It's a big year for Mississippi, make or break year for them, and LSU, as always, enters with a ton of talent on the roster. They usually, they just seem to tend to underwhelm. They don't get the kind of quarterback play that they need to really become one of the elite teams consistently. Do you have anything to say about Mississippi or LSU?
Well, Mississippi last year did what they were supposed to do this year. They were supposed to have a good team last year, and this was going to be their big year. Of course, Mississippi made a run at the national title last year, and then they slowed down a little bit at the end. But they have a ton of talent from one of the best recruiting classes in the country from 2013. One of their keys is a quarterback, Chad Kelly's had some off-the-field issues, but hopefully he can kind of keep his head on. But now Mississippi has that burden of high expectations. They go from the hunter to the hunted. So that is the big question. But they have a strong offensive line. Mississippi, the talent's there, but they're not going to sneak up on teams. So they're kind of in uncharted waters where they have the high expectations. And that could be one of their biggest question marks is, will they be able to finally handle those high expectations? Because remember, they kind of faltered late last year. And you mentioned LSU. They're very talented at wide receiver, but do they have somebody who can throw them the ball? I have them circled as really my predictably unpredictable team, especially on offense. I think 1 week LSU's offense is going to look tremendous. I think the next week they're going to look terrible. The most successful gamblers bet on inconsistency, and I do think that LSU's offense will be the poster child of inconsistency this year. But their running back Fournette, last year he showed some flashes. Supposedly he worked on his strength and conditioning, and this could be a year that he contends for the Heisman Trophy. So I do think that LSU will have a pretty good running game, but I think that passing game is going to be a true box of chocolates, as I like to say.
Sure. So from the SEC West, what are your early leans that you're going to be looking for to start the year?
Well, most definitely Texas A&M, I do think, will be an under team early. LSU, as I said, as soon as they have a great offensive effort, pretty good chance I'm going to bet the under the next week or vice versa. If they have a terrible offensive effort, I might be inclined to bet the over. Arkansas, I do think will want to make some statements and maybe will blow out some teams. But, again, and Auburn, I do think will be an under team early in the year as well. I think Auburn and Texas A&M will somewhat mirror each other.
But for Joe Duffy's final picks, of course, his website is offshoreinsiders.com, and all that you can find there. Joe Duffy, thanks so much.